Silence had weight in the council chamber, not the absence of noise, but the presence of something held back, something accumulated, something waiting. 3,000 delegates from 847 species filled the curved observation tiers that rose in concentric circles from the central floor, and every single one of them was shouting. The acoustic architecture of the chamber had been designed 12,000 years ago by the founding species to amplify voices, to ensure that even the smallest delegation could be heard across the vast space. The translators buzzed against lapels and thorax plates and neural interfaces, converting outrage into 17,000 simultaneous dialects, creating a layered roar that no single mind could fully process. The acoustic dampeners installed 3 centuries later, when the Kael'mora delegation had threatened permanent hearing damage from the founding species' enthusiasm, had failed 6 minutes ago. No one had noticed. The Galactic Council had not experienced this level of discord in 10,000 years of recorded session, and the irony that no one could hear themselves think was lost on everyone present, except the human. He sat in the observation gallery, row 7, seat 42. A position specifically selected 12 years ago because it faced the Supreme Arbiter's podium at a precise 37-degree angle, allowing the occupant to observe both the speaker and the chamber's reactions without the appearance of confrontation or deference. The human had requested this seat during his second week of service, citing acoustic preferences in the formal documentation. No one had questioned it. No one remembered why. No one had asked. His name was Beckett. Earth's silent ambassador. Former combat medic with the United Earth Expeditionary Force, though the Council registry listed him as Diplomatic Attaché, Translation Services, Junior Grade. He had treated vacuum exposure on 17 worlds, performed field surgery during the Kael'mora resource wars, stabilized a Dorvathi telepath through cascading neural feedback, all before accepting this post at age 34. He had not raised his voice once in 12 years of service. He had not initiated a conversation in 11. He responded when addressed. He provided translation services when requested. He attended every session, every vote, every emergency consultation, and he never ever spoke unless protocol demanded. He was smiling. Nobody could explain why. Supreme Arbiter Velker of the Dorvathi stood at the central podium, his telepathic aura projecting authority in waves that made non-telepathic species instinctively want to agree with him, to trust him, to follow where he led. The Dorvathi had evolved emotional broadcasting as their primary communication modality 12 million years ago on a world where auditory vibration was rare, and atmospheric density carried empathic resonance with perfect fidelity. Their spoken words were secondary, almost decorative, to the certainty they could make others feel. Velker felt righteous. The chamber felt it with him. The feeling was warm, was certain, was the comfort of justified action taken against long-standing irritation. The human delegation has violated the fundamental protocols of this council, Velker projected, his voice a resonant afterthought to the emotional command that saturated the chamber. Their silence is contempt. Their presence is disruption. Their refusal to engage with telepathic interface demonstrates an inherent incompatibility with galactic civilization. Their economic practices threaten the stability of 12 regulated markets. Their technological development proceeds without proper oversight. Their very biology, with its chaotic neural patterns and unpredictable emotional responses, creates unacceptable risk in diplomatic contexts. He paused, allowing the projection to settle, to become the water in which the chamber swam. The proposal is simple. Earth's provisional membership, granted 12 years ago on experimental basis, is hereby revoked. Human delegation will depart within one standard rotation. Human vessels will be barred from council space. Human trade will proceed through third-party intermediaries only, with appropriate tariffs to offset security concerns. The vote is called. Beckett's smile did not waver. He reached into his jacket pocket, the motion unhurried, almost meditative. His fingers found the small thermos that had been his companion for 12 years, stainless steel with a ceramic lining, earth-manufactured, unremarkable. He withdrew it. He unscrewed the cap with 3 precise rotations, the metal threads catching light from the chamber's bioluminescent ceiling, creating a small flash that no one saw. The sound of the seal breaking was swallowed by the shouting. He poured coffee into the cap, which served as a cup. The liquid was dark, viscous, clearly recycled station water filtered through whatever process humans used to make it palatable, heated to precisely 67 degrees Celsius, maintained by the thermos's thermal regulation system. He drank. Fremva watched from the maintenance gallery, her forearms wrapped around the calibration console for the chamber's surveillance systems, her compound eyes tracking the scene below with the detached attention of someone who had seen 17 supreme arbiters rise and fall, who had witnessed 400 years of diplomatic theater, who had learned that the most significant moments often looked like nothing at all. She was Zelkathi, species designation SB-18, pacifist bicultural mandate established 3,000 years ago after the self-war nearly extinguished her species, conflict avoidant by biological instinct that made direct confrontation physically painful. She had serviced these surveillance systems for 400 years, since before the current chamber was built, since before humans were discovered, since before the Dorvathi claimed supremacy. She had seen species enter the council as conquerors and depart as beggars. She had seen founding species humbled and new species elevated. She had never, in 400 years, seen a human drink coffee during a vote to exile their entire species. The vote was already decided, 2,847 in favor of Earth's expulsion, 12 against. The 12 were Zelkathi. Threnva did not know this yet. She would learn it later in a hallway when the human passed her and said nothing and somehow said everything. She would learn it when Korvath told her, his mandibles clicking with something between pride and fear. She would learn it when she checked the records herself, confirming what her heart already suspected. Velker's telepathic projection shifted to triumph, the emotional broadcast cresting like a wave breaking on shore. The vote is concluded, the feeling said. Earth's seat is revoked. The matter is settled. We have acted with wisdom and justice. Earth's seat is revoked, Velker's voice confirmed, redundant to the feeling. Human delegation will depart within one standard rotation. Their silence will no longer burden these proceedings. Beckett finished his coffee. The liquid was bitter, acidic, exactly as it had been every day for 12 years. He screwed the cap back onto the thermos with the same 3 precise rotations, the threads meshing with worn familiarity. He stood. The chamber did not quiet. Why would it? He was one human, unarmed, unaccompanied, wearing the same gray diplomatic tunic he had worn for 12 years, the fabric repaired at the seams by station maintenance services, the color faded from repeated cleaning. His microphone, standard council-issue translation device, sat live on his lapel, a small black disc no larger than his thumbnail, unmarked, unremarkable, identical to the 30,000 other microphones distributed throughout the chamber. It had been live for 12 years, it was recording now, it would continue recording. He walked down the gallery steps. Not slowly, not quickly, the pace of someone who had already done what he came to do, who had finished before the others realized the race had begun. His boots made no sound on the composite flooring, the soft soles worn to perfect silence. Velker sensed the movement before he saw it. The telepathic aura flickered, uncertainty leaking through the broadcast confidence like water through cracked stone. The human was not supposed to move. The human was supposed to sit, to accept, to depart with whatever dignity he could salvage. Movement implied agency. Agency implied unpredictability. Unpredictability was the one thing the Dorvathi could not broadcast away. The delegate from Earth will submit to escort, Velker projected, his voice following the emotional command like an echo. Security protocols require. You have exactly one chance to reconsider. Beckett's voice was not loud. The microphone amplified it to the necessary volume, distributing his words in 847 languages with perfect clarity, the translation systems rendering his tone as precisely as they rendered his meaning. This is it. He did not wait for response. He walked past the security station, past the Dorvathi guards whose telepathic confusion made them hesitate in their movements, their training conflicting with their suddenly uncertain emotions. He walked past the delegation from the Kaelmora Economic Collective, who had been studying human economic patterns for 3 centuries, who had built forecasting models on human behavior data, who suddenly wondered if they had been studying the wrong thing entirely, if the data they collected was the data they were meant to see. He walked to the coffee station near the east exit, the small automated dispenser that served 12 varieties of stimulant beverages adapted for various biochemistries. He selected Earth Standard coffee, the machine word. He poured another cup into his thermos cap. He drank it while the chamber erupted behind him, delegates shouting about procedure, about precedent, about the insult of casual beverage consumption during existential political crisis, about the human's failure to display appropriate distress at his species' expulsion. The microphone stayed on his lapel. He had not touched it. He would not touch it. He finished the coffee. He placed the empty cup in the recycler with a soft clink that no one heard, the sound absorbed by the acoustic chaos of the chamber. He walked out the east exit. The doors sealed behind him with the pneumatic sigh of atmospheric containment, the sound that marked transition from council space to station proper, from performance to reality. The microphone remained live. Velker did not notice. He was projecting victory too loudly to perceive absence, too busy broadcasting the emotional certainty of righteous action to recognize what had just occurred. The human had not argued. The human had not pleaded. The human had issued a warning, consumed a beverage, and departed. The human had smiled. Threnva noticed. She watched the status indicator on her console. Mic 7G42, active, audio transmitting, 847 channels. The microphone was still broadcasting silence to every translation hub in the chamber, to every recording system, to every backup server distributed across the station's redundant networks. Silence in 847 languages with perfect clarity. The system registered it as active transmission. The system did not distinguish between sound and silence, between speech and its absence. Both were data. Both were archived. She should have reported it. Standard protocol, malfunctioning equipment, security risk, immediate deactivation required. A live microphone in an empty seat was a breach of surveillance guidelines. A live microphone transmitting to 847 channels without an authorized operator was a potential intelligence vulnerability. She should have flagged it for security review, should have dispatched a maintenance drone, should have followed the procedures that had governed her work for 400 years. She did not. Something about the human's smile, something about the way he had looked at the microphone before leaving, not at it but through it, as if seeing something on the other side of the device that no one else could see, as if the microphone were not a tool but a witness, not a transmitter but a promise. Threnva's secondary heart, the one that handled stress responses her primary heart could not process without damaging its primary function, began to beat. The rhythm was unfamiliar, unsettling, the biological signal that something significant had occurred, that attention was required, that the patterns she had observed for 400 years were about to shift. She would remember this moment. She would remember it when the silence reached 847 worlds. She would remember it when she understood what the smile meant. Would you have smiled, or would you have spoken? Because Beckett knew the difference, and the galaxy was about to learn it too. Threnva found the maintenance log entry from 11 years prior. It had taken her 6 hours of searching through the archive, buried under 17,000 routine calibration reports, automated system checks, and diagnostic logs that no one had reviewed since their creation. The human had requested a microphone upgrade in his 2nd year of service. Standard replacement, he had claimed, audio degradation in high-frequency ranges, interference patterns affecting translation accuracy. She had approved it personally. She remembered now, the memory surfacing like a bubble through deep water. He had been polite. He had thanked her in Zelkathi, which no human had ever done, which no human had ever attempted. The pronunciation had been imperfect but respectful, the effort obvious, the cultural research implied in the very attempt. He had learned the phonemes that her species found comfortable, had avoided the tonal combinations that caused physical distress, had shaped his human mouth around sounds it was not designed to produce. The microphone she had installed was not standard issue. She checked the specifications now, cross-referencing with the original manufacturing logs from the Kalemora Industrial Collective, the production records, the supply chain documentation. The device Beckett had requested included expanded storage capacity, 12 standard years of continuous audio recording at maximum fidelity, redundant backup systems, 3 independent power sources with automatic failover. Independent power source with 400-year operational lifespan, a microfusion cell typically reserved for deep space probes, not diplomatic equipment. Frequency ranges extending into encrypted communication bands used by Council security. The ability to receive as well as transmit, to listen to frequencies that were supposed to be secure. It was still broadcasting, still active. still sitting on the empty seat in row 7, gallery section, facing the Supreme Arbiter's podium at a slight angle, collecting everything. Day 3 of silence. The council had continued without the human delegation. Velker had declared the expulsion a success, had proclaimed the resolution of the human problem, had moved immediately to new business regarding trade route regulation in the Outer Rim. Earth's trade licenses were suspended, human vessels were barred from council space. Human diplomatic personnel were given 48 hours to depart the station. The economic impact was projected at 2.3% of galactic GDP, manageable, absorbable, a minor correction in the grand flow of interstellar commerce, barely worth noting in the quarterly reports. But something was wrong. Threnva noticed it first in the security feeds she monitored as part of her surveillance maintenance duties. The Zelkathi security officers, her own species, were asking questions, quiet questions, in hallways, in maintenance corridors. In the spaces between official duties where surveillance was technically present but rarely reviewed, where conversations were supposed to be private but were always recorded, they were asking about the human, not about the expulsion. Not about the political implications, about the silence. Why did he smile? Why did he warn us? Why did he say this is it? The questions had no answers in the official record. The record showed a human accepting defeat with strange calm, displaying inappropriate behavior during a formal vote, confirming the council's wisdom in removing an unstable element. The questions suggested something else. Something Threnva was not trained to analyze but was equipped to observe, something that moved beneath the surface of events like a current beneath ice. She began observing more closely. The Dorvathi telepathic network, which relied on human translators to interface with non-telepathic species, began experiencing what the technical reports called translation static on day 7. The phenomenon was subtle at first. Minor delays in emotional broadcasting, slight degradation in nuanced transmission, the occasional need for a Dorvathi telepath to repeat a projection for clarity. The humans who had operated the translation hubs, who had filtered and contextualized and mediated between telepathic and non-telepathic communication modes, were gone. Their replacements, automated systems from the Kael'Morat Collective, lacked the nuance to handle emotional subtleties, the cultural knowledge to interpret context, the patience to manage the complex feedback loops that made telepathic diplomacy possible. Diplomatic communications between telepathic and non-telepathic species began to degrade. Misunderstandings accumulated. Tensions rose. A trade negotiation between the Dorvathi and the Kael'Morat collapsed when an emotional projection was misinterpreted as threat rather than enthusiasm. A security consultation between the Zelkathi and the founding species resulted in conflicting orders when tonal cues were lost in automated translation. Velker projected confidence. The chamber felt it with him. But Threnva, watching from her maintenance gallery with the perspective of 400 years, saw the projections becoming forced, the emotional broadcast requiring more energy, the certainty costing him something essential, something that could not be replenished. Day 12, the Zelkathi security chief, a male named Korvath whom Threnva had known for 2 centuries, approached her in the secondary observation deck during the maintenance cycle when the surveillance systems were briefly offline. He did not ask about microphone calibration. He did not ask about camera alignment or audio fidelity. He asked about the human's routine. 12 years, Korvath said. His voice was low, conflict-avoidant by nature and training, but there was something in his posture that Threnva recognized with her secondary heart's sudden rhythm. The tension of a pacifist considering action, of a species designed for harmony confronting the necessity of choice. Every day, same seat, same thermos, same exit pattern. Yes, Threnva confirmed. She did not ask how he knew. The security network saw everything. That was its purpose, its design, its invisible function. He never varied. Not once. Not in 12 years. And the microphone. Threnva felt her secondary heart activate, the stress response flooding her system with chemicals that sharpened perception and accelerated thought. Still active, broadcasting silence. Korvath's mandibles clicked, the Zelkathi equivalent of a grim smile, the expression of someone who had seen what others missed and was not certain whether to feel pride or dread. We voted for him, all 12 of us, the Zelkathi delegation. We were the only ones. I know. He knew too before the vote. He looked at us, he smiled. They stood in silence for a moment, two maintenance workers in the spaces between power, watching the chamber below where 3,000 delegates shouted about problems they did not understand were connected, about crises they did not recognize as symptoms, about a silence they had not yet learned to hear. Day 30, Korvath said, something will happen on day 30. How do you know? Because he told us this is it. He was not talking about the expulsion, he was talking about what comes after. Drenva returned to her console. She checked the microphone status. Still active. Still transmitting silence to 847 channels. The audio logs from the past 12 days showed nothing but ambient chamber noise, procedural arguments, Velker's increasingly strained projections of confidence, the thousand small sounds of a system continuing because it could not imagine stopping. But the data logs, the metadata, the patterns that existed beneath the surface of what was heard, the microphone was not just transmitting, it was receiving. Encrypted bursts piggybacking on standard council communication frequencies disguised as routine maintenance signals, indistinguishable from the background noise of station operations. Small packets distributed across 12 years, accumulating in the microphone's expanded storage capacity, building a library and archive, a record of everything that had been said in the belief that no one was listening. Threnva traced the pattern. The device had been downloading information every night for 12 years during the maintenance windows when security systems were briefly offline, when surveillance was suspended for calibration, when the watchers were not watching themselves. 12 years of council communications, backroom deals, species manipulating species, corruption layered upon corruption, hidden behind the assumption that no one was listening because the humans never spoke, because silence meant ignorance, because absence meant impotence. The human had not been silent, he had been archiving, which meant the microphones had been listening for 12 years, not 12 minutes. Threnva's primary heart stopped. Her secondary heart compensated, flooding her system with adrenaline analogs that cleared her vision and sharpened her thoughts to crystalline edges. She understood now, partially, the shape of what was coming. Not the details, not the specific mechanism, but the architecture of silence as weapon, patience as strategy, presence as threat, the inversion of everything the council believed about power and communication and the nature of human limitation. She looked at the live feed from the chamber. Velker was speaking about new trade regulations, his telepathic aura projecting stability with visible effort, the emotional broadcast thinning at its edges. The microphone on seat 42, row 7, gallery section, continued broadcasting silence in 847 languages, continued receiving in frequencies that were supposed to be secure, continued being exactly what it had always been while becoming something entirely different. The silence had weight, not absence, pressure, like the atmosphere before a storm, like the held breath before thunder. Like the moment between the lightning's flash and the sound that follows when you know something is coming but not yet what, when the world holds itself in anticipation of breaking. The galaxy had forgotten that thunder was just the echo of silence breaking. The number had become a countdown without anyone announcing it, a rhythm felt in the station's operational patterns, the way maintenance crews spoke in shorter sentences, the way delegates checked their communication devices with increasing frequency, the way the air itself seemed to carry anticipation like a charge before discharge. The human had said this is it on day 0, the security chief had predicted day 30. The symmetry felt intentional, designed, the architecture of a plan that had been building for 12 years and was now reaching its completion. The silence reached 847 worlds, not simultaneously, not dramatically, not with the theatrical flourish of invasion or the spectacle of weapon discharge. A translator failed on Kaelmer II at 300 station time, a minor malfunction, a routine maintenance issue that would be resolved within hours. A diplomatic transmission between the Dorvathi homeworld and the Kaelmora collective dissolved into static at 3:15, attributed to solar interference, to equipment degradation, to the thousands small failures that complicated interstellar communication. By 417 worlds had reported complete loss of human-provided translation services, the automated replacements failing to handle the complexity of the work, the nuance of the communication, the essential function that had been invisible until it was absent. By 600 the number was 847, every world that had voted for Earth's expulsion, every species that had supported the resolution. Every delegation that had celebrated the removal of human presence from council space. They all lost, simultaneously, the services they had not realized they depended upon. The infrastructure they had assumed was automatic, the human labor that had made their diplomatic and economic systems function. The council chamber had not yet convened for the emergency session that Velker had called at 500. Thremva watched from her maintenance gallery as delegates arrived in clusters, their body language telegraphing confusion before their words could, their movements jerky with uncertainty, their usual confidence replaced by something that looked almost like fear. The Kael'morite delegates, who had built their economic forecasting models on human data patterns, who had used human analytical frameworks to predict market movements and resource allocation, clutched tablets displaying error messages, their three-limbed hands trembling with the realization that their entire predictive infrastructure had been built on access they no longer possessed. The Dorvathi, unable to broadcast emotional certainty without human-filtered translation protocols, moved in jerky, uncoordinated patterns, their telepathic auras bleeding anxiety into the chamber's atmosphere like dye into water, creating an emotional environment that made rational discussion impossible, that triggered stress responses in species not equipped to handle Dorvathi emotional intensity without buffering. Velker arrived last. His projection of authority required effort now, visible even to non-telepaths, the telepathic equivalent of shouting to be heard over a noise that grew louder with each attempt to overcome it. The aura flickered at its edges, the certainty fraying, the righteousness developing gaps where doubt leaked through. The translation network is experiencing technical difficulties, he announced. His voice was steady, trained for 12 centuries of diplomatic service. The emotional broadcast was not. Maintenance crews are addressing the issue. We will proceed with standard protocol. There was no standard protocol for this. Thremva knew what they did not. She had reviewed the logs during the long hours of the night cycle when the chamber was empty and the surveillance systems recorded only silence and the occasional maintenance drone. The human translation services had not merely converted languages, had not simply rendered words from one syntax to another. They had filtered emotional broadcasts, contextualized cultural references, mediated between telepathic and non-telepathic communication modes, managed the complex feedback loops that made galactic diplomacy possible. The galaxy had built its diplomatic infrastructure on human labor for 12 years, had integrated human services into every level of its operations, had assumed that this labor was automatic, mechanical, replaceable. Then they had forgotten the laborers were infrastructure, had expelled the humans who made their systems function, and were now discovering that the replacement they had assumed existed did not, could not, would not function with the same effectiveness. She looked at seat 42, row 7. The microphone was still there, still active, still broadcasting silence to 847 channels, still receiving in frequencies that were supposed to be secure, still being exactly what it had always been while the world around it changed. Velker sensed her observation. Telepaths could not read non-telepathic minds, could not access the specific content of thoughts, but they could perceive attention, the pressure of being watched, the focus of another consciousness directed toward them. His head turned, his eyes, compound and iridescent, found her in the maintenance gallery, found the four-armed figure wrapped around her console, found the observer who had watched for 400 years. You, Zelkathi, report. Thremva's primary heart stopped. Her secondary heart compensated, the stress response activating with full force, the biological preparation for confrontation that her species had evolved to avoid, that her culture had trained her to prevent, that she was now experiencing for the first time in 400 years of service. She had not spoken in council session for 400 years. Maintenance workers were invisible by design, present but not perceived, seen but not noticed, the perfect observers because they were never observed. The surveillance system is functioning within normal parameters, she said. Her voice emerged steady, the conflict-avoidant instinct overridden by something she did not recognize in herself, something that had grown during 12 days of watching the microphone, of understanding its function, of recognizing the pattern that Beckett had built. All microphones are active, all channels are transmitting. Then why is there silence? Because silence is what is being transmitted. The chamber's confusion crystallized into something sharper, something that cut through the emotional chaos of the Dorvathi anxiety and the practical panic of the economic delegations. Velker's aura spiked with threat perception, the emotional broadcast making delegates flinch, making non-telepathic species feel the sensation of danger without understanding its source. What do you mean? Threnva descended from the maintenance gallery. She had never walked the chamber floor, had never left her observation perch in 400 years of service. The perspective was wrong, too open, too exposed, the angles unfamiliar, the distance to the central podium both farther and closer than it appeared from above. She approached seat 42 and stopped, standing before the empty chair that had been Beckett's for 12 years, that was still his in some sense she was only beginning to understand. "This microphone has been active for 12 years, she said. Her voice carried to the tiered observation seats, amplified by the chamber's acoustic architecture, distributed by the translation systems that were still functioning for the moment. It recorded everything. It also recorded when the human stopped speaking. It is still recording. It will continue recording. Deactivate it. I cannot. This was true. The protocol required authorization from the seat's assigned delegate, from the diplomatic representative who had been granted the position, who had the right to control the equipment assigned to them. Earth's delegation had been expelled. The authorization chain was broken by design, by the very expulsion that was now revealing its consequences. The system is functioning as intended. Velker's telepathic projection shifted to command, the emotional broadcast attempting to compel obedience, to trigger submission, to make Threnva feel the necessity of compliance. Then we will physically remove. Screens activated. Every display in the chamber, every tablet, every communication device, every translation hub across 847 worlds simultaneously received the same broadcast, the same signal, the same face appearing in perfect synchronization. The face was unremarkable, gray diplomatic tunic, same as 12 years ago, same slight smile, now visible in context that made it terrifying, that transformed it from the expression of a defeated diplomat to the confidence of someone who had already won. Beckett, Earth's silent ambassador, former combat medic, current architect of silence. He held a coffee cup, the same thermos cap from day zero. Threnva realized with a shock of recognition that made her secondary heart stutter. He had kept it for 12 years through the expulsion and the preparation and the 30 days of silence. He had kept the cup that he had used in the chamber, the mundane object that had been part of the performance. "The ships you detected," Beckett said. His voice was calm, unamplified by any visible technology, transmitted through the microphone network he had built, distributed through the channels that were supposed to be secure, that had been his for 12 years. "Those are the ones we wanted you to find." He paused, sipped coffee. The sound was audible across 847 worlds, the small intimacy of consumption, the mundane act that had marked his presence in the chamber now marking his absence from it. 12 years ago I requested a microphone upgrade, expanded storage, independent power, extended frequency range. The request was approved by a Zelkathi maintenance technician who treated me with respect, who saw me when others looked through me, who recognized my presence when others perceived only absence. The smile flickered, genuine warmth interrupting performance, the human expression of gratitude that Threnva had earned without knowing she was earning it. "Thank you, Threnva. Your kindness was noted. Your species' vote was noted." The 12 who stood with Earth when 835 stood against, we do not forget. Threnva felt the chamber's attention shift to her, physical pressure like atmospheric change, the weight of being seen after 400 years of invisibility. She did not flinch. She had earned this attention, not through action but through presence, through the simple act of treating another being with respect when the system trained her to ignore them. "Every word spoken in this chamber for 12 years has been archived," Beckett continued. "Every backroom deal, every species manipulating species, every corruption layered upon corruption, hidden behind the assumption that no one was listening because we never spoke. That silence meant ignorance, that absence meant impotence." He set down the coffee cup. The sound was amplified across 847 worlds, intimate and threatening, the small clink of ceramic on surface carrying the weight of everything that was about to be revealed. "Your territory is no longer yours, it never was." The broadcast shifted, audio recordings played. Velker's voice 3 years prior, arranging favorable trade terms in exchange for suppressing environmental data that would have prevented the Kael'Morai from expanding into protected sectors. The Kael'Morai delegation 5 years ago discussing human economic dependency as a strategic advantage to be exploited, as leverage to be applied, as weakness to be manipulated. 17 species, 12 years of conversations, all preserved in the microphone's expanded storage, all transmitted now to every world that had participated in Earth's expulsion, all revealing the corruption that had been hidden behind the assumption of human ignorance. The chamber did not erupt, it froze. This was the revelation Threnva had partially understood, the architecture she had glimpsed in the data logs, the pattern she had recognized without comprehending its full scope. Not military power. Not technological superiority, knowledge power. The power of being present when others assumed you were absent, of listening when others assumed you were ignorant, of archiving when others assumed you were silent. The galaxy had conducted its business assuming the humans were silent. The humans had been listening. The galaxy had assumed the humans were ignorant. The humans had been learning. The galaxy had assumed the humans were weak. The humans had been patient. Beckett's face returned to the screens. You feared our weapons. You should have feared our silence. That was the thunder. The broadcast ended. The screens went dark. The microphone on seat 42 continued transmitting silence, but the silence had changed. It was no longer absence. It was presence. It was the space where secrets had lived, now emptied, now available for whatever would come next. Velker's telepathic aura collapsed. Without the human translation filters, without the nuanced mediation that had made his emotional broadcasts palatable to non-telepathic species, his projection was raw, unmediated, terrifying to species who had never experienced Dorvathi communication without buffering. He projected panic. The chamber received it. The delegates felt his fear as their own, the emotional contagion spreading through the telepathic resonance that the Dorvathi had evolved to create, that they had never learned to control because they had never needed to, because the humans had always managed it for them. Threnva returned to her maintenance gallery. She did not need to watch what came next. She had seen the architecture. She understood the weight of silence. She knew what would happen because she had seen the pattern, because she had recognized the design, because she had been present at its creation. Pressure. The Dorvathi telepathic network collapsed within hours. Without human translation protocols, without the filtering and contextualization that had made interspecies communication possible, the species that had built their civilization on shared emotional experience could not interface with other species. Their communication was too direct, too overwhelming, too intimate for diplomatic necessity, too raw for political negotiation, too honest for the thousand small deceptions that made galactic civilization function. They retreated to their homeworld. Velker was recalled by his own government, his authority revoked, his corruption now public record across 847 worlds, his name synonymous with the arrogance that had assumed power without understanding its sources. The council did not dissolve, it was ignored. Species began negotiating directly with Earth, not through the council chamber, not through diplomatic protocols, not through the structures that had governed interstellar relations for 12,000 years. They negotiated through the microphone network that still functioned, still transmitted, still archived, the infrastructure that Beckett had built and that no one else could replicate. The silence became infrastructure. The absence became presence. The weapon that was not a weapon became the foundation of a new order. Day 45. Threnva walked the chamber floor again. She had not intended to, her maintenance route did not require it. But something pulled her, some resonance with the space that had changed without changing, some connection to the pattern that she had been part of creating. The chamber was empty. 847 seats, abandoned. Delegates had departed gradually, then suddenly, then completely. Some returned to homeworlds to manage crises. Some sought direct negotiation with Earth. Some simply could not occupy the same space where their secrets had been exposed, where their assumptions had been proven wrong, where a human had smiled while they shouted. Velker's podium stood silent. The acoustic dampeners functioned perfectly now. There was no shouting to overwhelm them. Seat 42, row 7, gallery section. Beckett sat there. Threnva's secondary heart activated, the surprise triggering the stress response that had become familiar over the past 45 days. She had not expected this. The human should have been on Earth or on one of the fleet vessels that had never needed to fire a weapon or anywhere but here, in the space of his victory, in the chamber of his triumph. He stood as she approached. He looked older. 12 years of silence had etched something into his face that she could not name, not hardness, not softness. The quality of pressure released, of weight lifted, of silence finally broken. You kept the microphone active, he said, not a question, an observation, a recognition. Yes. Why? Threnva considered the question. 400 years of maintenance work, 17 supreme arbiters. The assumption that her role was invisible, that service was not strategy, that silence was not strength, that presence was not power. Because you taught me, she said, silence has weight. Beckett smiled. The same smile from day zero, but transformed. Then it had been preparation. Now it was completion. Then it had been the beginning. Now it was the end. He reached into his jacket pocket, withdrew the microphone. The device that had recorded 12 years of secrets, that had transmitted the broadcast, that had become the symbol of everything the galaxy had misunderstood about human communication, about human patience, about the power that did not announce itself. He placed it on seat 42. This microphone heard everything, he said. It also heard me stop speaking. He walked to the exit, paused, turned back. The Zelkathi voted for us, all 12 of you, I never forgot. Then he was gone. The doors sealed with the pneumatic sigh of atmospheric containment, the sound that marked transition, that signaled ending, that carried the weight of completion. Threnva stood alone in the chamber. She approached seat 42. The microphone sat there, still active, still transmitting, still being exactly what it had always been. She checked her console. The status indicator showed what it had shown for 45 days, what it would show for 400 years. Active audio transmitting 847 channels. She could deactivate it now. The authorization protocols had changed. Earth's delegation was no longer expelled. The chain of command was restored. She had the access, the authority, the technical capability to end the transmission, to stop the silence, to close the channel. She did not. The galaxy had listened to thunder for 40,000 years. It had forgotten that thunder was just the echo of silence breaking, and in the silence that followed, the galaxy began to grow up. The council chamber was silent for the first time in 10,000 years.